She won most talkative in high school, and she has been running her mouth ever since. Welcome to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast with your host, Lisa Fisher.
Hi, everybody. I'm here with Jen Stevens, and we're doing this live. We're recording it live. We're going to upload it later, but we're doing a podcast with the one and only famous Jen Stevens in the flesh. I've only seen her via screens for many years, because when I started intermittent fasting in 2017, that's when you actually had friend opportunities on your Facebook page.
That's true.
And I ooched my way in, and I became a real... I guess an FOG, friend of Jen.
Well, yeah.
I became an FOG. Jen is no longer on the Facebook, so RIP to Facebook for her. But that's when I think I developed a friendship with you, and I could communicate with you, and I was brand new, and I was still on the radio then, and I would, any radio station I was on, I was like, come on and be my guest. She was like, okay. She's such a good sport. And when I launched my podcast, you were such a good sport. I said, I want to launch my podcast with you. I mean, you're the most famous person we know.
Well.
And you said, you were so gracious. You even said, I do every podcast request that comes my way.
I still do.
That is,
even if it's like, two college kids in the dorm
so
doing a podcast.
sweet.
I don't mind, because I'm a teacher, and if they teach 5 more people about intermittent fasting, that's enough.
And
right?
that really is. It's the multiplication effect that we love about intermittent fasting, meaning you tell 2 people, they tell 2 people.
Like that shampoo commercial from the 70s or 80s, whenever
You're
that
dating
was.
yourself. I'm not that old, so I don't know. But we're here, and we actually have people in my home. Just so people know, it's called the Topo Chico Unsweetened
I've got my Topo
Tea and Black Coffee Party. It's the cheapest way to have a party. Invite your intermittent fasting friends
and
who are
have
fasting.
It in the morning.
Have it in the morning,
because
you don't have to spend it. I spent some dollars on some water, and that was it.
Absolutely.
And so you even told your host, Becky Norris, you said, I'm a cheap date. I just want black coffee.
She said, what can I get for you? I'm like, I don't need anything.
Right. Isn't that? And we'll go over some of the freedoms of intermittent fasting. But everybody in here is an intermittent faster. Wouldn't you say one of the freedoms is not having to worry about food in the morning, or just? And when people ask you have you stayed at other people's houses, well, they'll say, well, we've got this and we've got that, and you're like, I'm good.
I don't need any of that.
I don't need any of that. Yeah. And we've got lots of questions here. First, we want to talk about Cleanish. This book dropped in January 4th or 5th.
4th, yeah.
And of course, you are the New York Times bestselling author, like you don't know, of Fast, Feast, Repeat. But I love the thing about you, Jen, even though you do have your doctorate, you're not the know-it-all. You could be, girl, you could milk that thing.
Well, a lot of people don't even know. Like, I met someone in the health and wellness field who's an influencer and mentors people who are coming up. She's like, why don't you call yourself Dr. Stevens? You have a doctorate. I'm like, because that's not, my field is gifted education. If I were writing books about gifted education, I would put Dr. Stevens on there. But I'm not going to do it in the health and wellness, because that's not my credential.
But it shows you've done the heavy lifting of science, of research.
Right. I know how to write a dissertation.
You do, and it's right here.
Yeah.
So Cleanish, how did this come about? Was it something you were thinking that we have a toxic overload, or was your publisher saying, hey, we have a toxic overload?
Well, no, that was from me. It's actually kind of funny, because after Fast, Feast, Repeat was a New York Times bestseller, my agent and my editor, they're like, what's your next intermittent fasting book going to be? And I'm like, I'm not going to write another intermittent fasting book. I said everything I had to say in that one. There's not anything different, I would say. I don't need to write another book about intermittent fasting. It's called The Complete Guide for a reason.
Yeah, right.
I'm done with that. Right. And they're like, yeah, but you do intermittent fasting. I'm like, well, I don't want to write another intermittent fasting book. And, so many of us in the community go through just what is a natural progression. When I started doing intermittent fasting consistently back in 2014, I didn't change what I was eating. I was eating the standard American diet. I was going through drive-thrus. I was picking up deli fried chicken to take home for dinner, right? And I didn't change what I was eating at all until later down the road. And over time, I started gradually craving different foods, and the better I ate, the better I felt, and it kind of just snowballed. But we hear that from a lot of intermittent fasters out there. You start to feel better, and then you also start to really, because we're fasting and we have our daily eating window, you suddenly can connect how you feel to what you're eating. And you're like, every time I eat those French fries at that wonderful restaurant at the beach, my stomach hurts. I can't eat those French fries anymore. And it's not because I'm dieting, it's because I don't like the way my stomach feels after I eat them. And so you just start naturally, cleaning things up. And so I was like, I want to write a book that helps people make that progression and understand why. Because it's not just, what you put into your body with your food, it's also what you put onto your body, and it's what you expose yourself to in your home environment. And so as you start going down the rabbit hole, you realize it's really, really important.
Did it shock you because when it's one of those that you listen to it on Audible and get the book. I highly recommend both. You have to stop it on Audible because I'm thinking, wait a minute, I'm walking into a cancer haven right now called my home, or I'm putting things on my skin that I'll be dead by midnight. It's almost
you're not going to be dead by midnight.
Right, it almost feels that way.
Well, and once you start realizing how unregulated these industries are, like for example, the personal care product industry. Some of the research absolutely shocked me. The breast cancer partners, I can't think of the name of the group exactly, but breast cancer prevention partners, I think is the name of the group. They studied personal care products and things that people were putting onto their body or using, and they found shocking results. Like the worst product they found was a hair product marketed to children of color. That was worse than like things you clean your kitchen countertops with, right? Mm-hmm. And you would never take your kitchen countertop spray and spray it on your child. Mm-hmm. Come here, let me spray this on you. No, you wouldn't do that. But you're buying these products and you're assuming that they're safe because they're selling them to us. And it's very unregulated. And the problem is and there's a lot of problems, but they test these chemicals one by one and in isolation, and they're like, well, if you use this little tiny bit and that's the only thing you're using, it's fine. But that's not how we live our life.
It's cumulative.
It's cumulative, and so you live your life with a drop of this and a drop of that. And the best analogy for that is a bucket, the bucket effect. And we all have a bucket. And everything that you put in your body, on your body, that's in your environment, fills up that bucket, and your body has to process it. And once that bucket gets full, it overflows. And so many of us are living with an overflowing bucket, and we don't know it. So the way you can help with that is put less in your bucket. And it's like what you're putting on your body, what you're cleaning your kitchen with, and the foods that you're eating. And it really makes a difference.
Well, you mentioned just flying here.
Yep.
And that your bucket was getting full yesterday. It is pollen season.
It was so funny. It was like I lived it yesterday.
Yes, right. And so tell me some of the things you encountered yesterday you didn't Monday through Sunday of the week before.
I'm from Augusta, Georgia, and like it is so bad. The other day I was looking out the window and you could see the pollen floating through the air, right? You go outside and our black table is now green, yellow. And so, but I haven't had seasonal allergies since 2016.
And you attribute that to fasting?
Absolutely. But also, I think a lot of it is, what I use in my home and what I put on my body. But, I'm not sneezing, I'm not having allergy medicine, I'm not having any problems. So yesterday I leave Augusta, get to the airport, get on the airplane, and they're spraying all this stuff. You go in the bathroom.
Oh, yeah, they do.
And the bathroom in Atlanta had this like special thing on the wall, and you rub your hand by it and it like releases fragrance.
Poison.
Motion activated, spraying you.
Yeah, no thanks.
And so then, I'm cleanish, right? So I don't have any kind of, sometimes, I'll eat things that are not like perfectly clean and pristine. So I'm at the Delta Sky Club, and I'm like, I had this extra long, our plane had mechanical problems. So I'm like, I'm just going to have a glass of something bubbly and, the barbecue potato chips. I don't buy barbecue potato chips, but I love them. So I'm like, I'm going to have this little bag. So I start eating the potato chips, and my nose started tickling.
Isn't that crazy?
And like I started sneezing, and I think that like the pollen was in my bucket, and I was fine. And then I flew on the airplane, and I was okay. And then like I swear to you, those barbecue potato chips, my bucket was like, no.
That was it.
So I sneezed and sneezed and sneezed. Like I feel bad for the guy sitting next to me on the plane who was probably like,
this is it, the plague.
Plague girl next to me. But I was sneezing and my nose was running, and I was like, my bucket just overflowed, and those chips sent it right over the edge. And so
what's the best way to detox a daily bucket?
I mean, it's just put less in. That's it. And, I think the pollen played a role.
For sure.
And then you can't help the environment that you're in, right? Yeah. I couldn't help the airports full of, all that stuff. And the plane, who knows what they sprayed it down with before.
Oh, that's it.
All
chemicals.
that. There's chemicals,
It's awful. I don't know if you've heard, we've had COVID for the last 2 years.
So
the world, right. So you go into businesses now, and they give you the option to use it's chemically ridden hand sanitizer. No, thank you.
I don't use it. Yeah, I wash my hands with water.
In the beginning, they wouldn't let you into like Lululemon unless you used hand sanitizer. So I didn't go in.
Yeah.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. That's one of the things we have to do to fight for autonomy on what we want to use. And I'm not going to use that. And kids in classrooms don't have the option because teachers are walking around saying, "Here's your hand sanitizer. Here's yours." Well, they don't know.
Right.
And then they're using the hair care products that is, could clean coat, clean whatever. Right. It's so invasive. Mm-hmm. And so that's who I really, now we can make our own decisions, but our children is who I really hate because the plastics they eat the food in. And I understand.
And it all adds
it does
up.
Add
and
up.
We see it in our kids right now. And I tell the story in Cleanish. You saw that in the introduction about my own son, Will, who's now 22.
That's a great story. Tell that.
And when my son Will was little, so many, I could talk about it for like hours, but he basically, I think, was born with an unhealthy gut. And a lot of that had to do with what I ate during pregnancy. I was taking my prenatal vitamins, so I thought I was good. Wrong. Yeah. I didn't really understand.
Well, strawberry Pop-Tarts, you thought had fruit.
McDonald's,
right.
I'm taking my prenatal vitamin, I'm getting everything I need to build a healthy baby. Right. But no, we don't really understand. We know a lot more now. Like, for example, about the gut. He was born in 1999. They were not even really sequencing our gut microbiomes until later than that. They didn't know what was all in there. And then they're like, wow, look at all this. We had no idea. But I think he was born with an unhealthy gut. He had thrush as an infant and had to go on antifungals. And he, can I say the word diarrhea on
You
your
can
podcast?
say it. We call it number 3 because there's number 1 and number 2. So he had number 3 all the time.
He had a lot of number 3. But it also, you could see that it would be like in line with his moods. Like he had a lot of tantrums. And he would have a tantrum and also like foamy number 3. Right. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, the foamy number 3.
Yeah. But he had, and we realized that I had a teacher that, after he was getting kicked out of daycare after daycare because of his tantrums.
That broke my heart when you were getting kicked out of daycare when I read that.
And, I was a teacher and I was, known for being a great classroom manager, right? And then my own child's getting kicked out of daycares. They're like, come pick him up. He can never come back. And
was he 2 or 3?
Well, it was right around that age.
Okay.
It was right around in there. It all kind of blends together because he was getting kicked out of all of them. 2 and 3 and, all of the ages.
It's the thug life, the baby thug life.
That's right. But he was the sweetest little fella, but he absolutely could not control himself.
Yeah.
And then right before we got kicked out of this other school, the teacher said, could it be what he's eating? And I'm like, well, I don't really know. I'd never heard of that before. And I, was a teacher. I didn't know. But apparently it's been known for a while that some children do not do well with the additives. Dr. Feingold, the Feingold Association's been around since the 70s. He was a pediatric allergist or something like that. And so he realized the connection between a lot of children's behavior. We know the gut is like, they call it the second brain. And we know that substances we put into our bodies, like, if you're doing drugs, it alters your mental state. Right. Or if you drink coffee, you might have extra energy. Or if you drink alcohol, you have a buzz. So we understand there's a connection. But the chemicals that are made, like maybe in your gut microbiome, actually, if they're not making good stuff, it can affect your brain. I read a book during that time. It was called Brain Allergies. And the foreword was written by Linus Pauling. If you've never heard of him, he won a Nobel Prize. And so he was not, a schlump.
No, it was not a schlump, I will say that.
And so that really gave it a lot of credibility to me. The whole idea, they called them brain allergies, but just that, your body releases these chemicals and it controls your mood. And so it was a fascinating book. It talked about like a guy who drove a tanker truck, and he developed some sort of like the petrochemicals, and it would make him be psychotic.
Wow.
And just getting away from those chemicals. cured his mental illness, but it was because of the chemicals that it was happening. And that just really struck me, like we just don't really know what all these chemicals are doing. You know if you rub something on your skin and you get a rash, you're like, well, there that was. But if you are around all these chemicals and you're having tantrums and you're 3 years old, you're just like, well, that kid's a handful. Why is that kid a handful? Is it because you're a bad parent? No, it's because something's going on in their body.
And he's trying to tell you.
He was, and he was absolutely, it was like a light switch would get flipped.
Then what was the first, I forgot the sequence, what was the first things you did? I remember the red dye, number 5.
Well, we got rid of all of that, all the
processed or anything boxed?
Well, not processed. No, we ate processed and boxed things, but just like the Feingold Association put out a list, and back then it was like a notebook.
Yeah.
They would send it to you, and it was like spiral bound. It was a little notebook, and it had food lists of products that didn't have the additives.
Now, did your husband think you were crazy?
He thought I was nuts. Yes.
Yeah.
And we had a real hard time with it because this was like, we were living like an hour away from Atlanta in a little town, Carrollton, Georgia. And back then it was like, early 2000s, and you didn't have big natural sections in your grocery store.
Oh, no.
So we had to go to Atlanta and go to Whole Foods to find the things that were on these lists. So I remember a fight we had in Whole Foods in Atlanta where the shampoo I wanted to buy was $8. He's like, I cannot live this way.
Wait, let me say one thing.
He's not going to listen, so I can say what I want.
And he's a PhD.
In medicinal chemistry.
Right, so he's thinking you're nuts.
Yeah.
And you were like, I'm the mama.
Trust me.
Mamas, don't we know?
We know.
We
and I'm like,
know.
well, you're just going to have to divorce me because we're buying this $8 shampoo.
All right.
Get with the program, Chad.
Right. And there
They
you
didn't
go.
divorce me, and we used the $8 shampoo.
And how long did that detox take, do you think?
Well, I really feel like we healed his gut over time. And so he got to the point when he was in probably 5th grade when he was able to tolerate these things again. And so I'm like, oh, we're cured. All right.
Yeah.
Back to everything.
No.
No.
Do you think, so let's talk about, there's a DNA connection, do you think, in vaginal birth with your boys?
Yes.
Because that's supposed to, we know that really helps their microbiome. So what do you think, is it something in your DNA,
Oh, I'm
epigenetics?
pretty sure I had a terrible microbiome at that
And
time
then
because I was only, like we didn't understand. Again, if you think back to how we were taught nutrition in like elementary school, I just remember we learned about the 4 food groups and there were vitamins and minerals and calories, but you can take this Flintstones vitamin and it's got everything you need. No, really, because I was like, okay, I could see a loophole. Okay, so you're telling me
love a loophole.
I could eat squash or just have that vitamin? I picked the vitamin.
That was easy, yeah.
That was it, but we didn't understand, or maybe it just wasn't communicated to us that there are a lot of phytochemicals in that squash that we don't even know what they all are. There are thousands of compounds in vegetables, and maybe we think it's this one, but really it's the other thousands of ones in there.
So his started your quest with food mainly. Were you thinking? Yeah, you were thinking topically because you were looking at shampoo.
Well, because it made such a difference. Things like if he was in the bathroom when he was in pre-K, if he would go to the bathroom and the custodian had just sprayed a bunch of stuff in there, his teacher's like, well, he was acting crazy after he went to the bathroom. But she was a believer. People who saw him and knew him believed it because they would see him and then they would see him lose control. And it was clearly not just because he was, a bad seed or something. Right,
and he's an adult now, and he doesn't live in a bubble.
No, he lives at our house.
Okay, well, that's probably close to a bubble.
He came back home, but yeah.
It just takes the impetus. We know one mother. I mean, we know the changes, and that you don't know who you affected at that preschool.
Exactly.
And who they told, and they didn't know what they were doing. They just knew they were trying to make a change. There was a book also written in the 80s, and Dr. Beth, you may know, it was called "Is This My Child" by Doris Rapp.
Oh yeah, I had that one.
I did too.
Absolutely.
And I interviewed her years ago.
Oh my God, she's amazing.
She died a few years ago because I even tracked her down recently because she still has so much. She was the voice, guys, before people were saying it.
I have her book still.
She was on Dr. Phil.
Yep.
And it changed my life. I remember seeing that, really understanding, and she explained the connection behavioral.
Yeah, and the environmental allergies, and she had pictures of kids, and like this is a kid having a reaction, and this is a kid, and the same kid when you get that out of their environment. Yeah, she was like Feingold, Rapp. Yeah. They were both very instrumental.
Yeah, they were early in that movement. Well, now, so and they did have environmental things, but now we're really looking at, Jen, we have and Dr. Bickman talks about if you buy foods in boxes with barcodes, you're really kind of setting yourself up for, you don't know what's in it. And if there are things you can't pronounce. So now do you try to then look at the things and wondering how we're all feeding our gut the good things.
Right.
Do you notice a difference in yourself if you have something that's maybe off your list?
Well, yeah, yesterday my nose.
Just potato chips, yeah.
But I mean, they were nothing cleanish about those potato chips, but there they were. I mean, I would not have bought them and brought them into my home, but there they were, and I'm like, I'm just gonna eat these chips because here they are. Yeah. And then my nose immediately, like I said, just like tickle, tickle, tickle. So I do see a difference. The better I feed my body, the better I feel. I mean, that's just the way it is. But I'm cleanish, so I'm not going to say I'm never going to have French fries at a restaurant ever again. But if I do, and then my stomach hurts, I'm like, well, there you go. That's what happens. Yeah. And I want to feel good. And so that's, I live my life wanting to feel good, making my choices that way.
What was your takeaway in this? Because it is a big book.
It is a big book.
You do cover a lot, and you do the ultra processed foods and eating mostly clean. What are some of your takeaways that you really glean and think, this was so eye-opening to me?
Well, just, in everything that I've read over years, it's just eat real food.
Yeah.
There's a concept called crowding out, where you prioritize real food, and real food is delicious. That once you really switch over your palate to real food, you'll taste something that you used to think was great. Like I used to love like the certain kind of Pop-Tarts. And I taste it now and it tastes like poison to me. I'm like, how did I like this? Like I can remember the first Christmas that after I'd been doing intermittent fasting for a while and drinking black coffee, I used to be the person who, like the first day of pumpkin spice season, I was in that line.
September 1st,
getting my pumpkin spice. And then when the gingerbread would come, I'd be like, woo! So one day I was at Target.
But you could quit anytime. You were not an addict, right?
Yeah, I could quit anytime. But I remember one time I was at Target and my window was open. So I'm like, I'm going to have this gingerbread spice latte. I'm so excited. And I started drinking it. I'm like, this tastes like rat poison, like total rat poison. I'm like, I was really sad. Yeah. Because I used to love it, but my taste was picking up all the artificial. Like, for example, I can't eat red velvet cake. Yeah. Because I can taste the food dye in it. And it is not delicious.
Even the food dye. Yeah. Wow.
I'm a super taster.
Yes, you are. That's a real discriminating
It is a real
palate.
thing. There is something called a super taster, and you can pick up different flavors than other people can.
Yeah, it's really valuable.
It's true.
Because it's also, as an animal won't eat certain dead, there's something wrong because it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's your little animal sniffer and
there
taster.
You go. And I just absolutely, so it's really easy to not eat those things that really they don't taste good to me anymore. Unfortunately, those barbecue potato chips still tasted good.
And then, besides the itchy nose, did you get a headache or anything else?
I didn't get a headache.
GI distress? Nothing?
No.
So I was
sneezing, and then I woke up this morning and I'm fine. But I just needed to get away from all that,
I think one of the most fun things you talk about, and I know people in here have talked about, it's all of a sudden this ability. And Chef Jamie McAfee's here. He's lost 93 pounds now. He's a celebrated chef. Amazing. Yeah, celebrated chef in the state of Arkansas. And he called me this summer, mad as a hornet, and I said, "Why?" And he goes, I'm craving Brussels sprouts. He said, I never liked Brussels sprouts.
That's really how you know, right?
Yes. It's all of a sudden these things that were foreign, that you thought your mother made you eat.
Yeah.
Your body says, there are nutrients in that that are delightful. And
our bodies do not count calories. Our bodies count nutrients. And so if you're not putting real food into your body, you can eat and eat and eat. You've probably had this experience, all of us have, where you're stuffed but still rummaging around in the kitchen because you're just not satisfied. It's because you haven't fed your body something that it needs. If you start with nutrients,
real food,
then you're not going to be like looking as much for that one more little thing because your body's like, all right, that was it. I've had my nutrients. And also, the way you cook it makes a difference. Yeah, my mother used to make Brussels sprouts, the frozen ones, and she would boil them.
Oh, no.
So if you don't like foods, it's probably because you're not cooking it very well.
Yeah. And can't we just roast everything in some avocado oil?
That's it.
And add other things to it. And that's the
It's a whole different thing. So if you think you don't like something, it might be the way your mama made it.
That's
right.
Sorry. Now, I know you used to use the food subscription services.
I still do.
Oh, I thought they all died. Are there some still available?
Yeah, I love, like Green Chef sponsors two of my podcasts. I love Green Chef, and I also love Sunbasket, and we use both of them every week. And it's because, like, they send organic produce.
And you've really enjoyed that.
I love it. It's real cooking. People
palate.
don't understand. They think that they're like sending you already prepared food, but you're not. Like, they send you like one tomato. Or like a little pouch of organic spices, like this much. You know, you don't have to go to the store and buy $10, you know, spice, whatever. Right. Instead, they send you exactly what you need. Or like a handful of Brussels sprouts for the meal. And so there's no food waste, which is what I really like. But, you know, I've tried a lot of things that I never would have tried before because you get in a rut. I did. I'm the kind of person that, like, if something happens to my food box and it doesn't come, I'm like, well, we're having chili.
Oh, that's
or
your
maybe
go-to.
we're gonna have spaghetti.
Okay, good.
You've
got two things in your repertoire then.
That's it.
Right.
Or I'll roast something, or we'll have a baked potato. I don't know, but you know, instead I'm eating like something with chickpeas or you know whatever. And we had shakshuka. I mean, you know, just different things.
Oh, I love shakshuka.
I do too.
Have you ever had shakshuka? It's an Israeli dish, right? Middle Eastern Israeli dish, Jamie. And it's got eggs on it, but it's tomatoes that you cook down with flavorful spices.
I never would have been like, I think I'm gonna make
so good.
And you have to buy all these tons of things, but if it just comes to you and you
so
like
it
open
came
the
to you
bag,
like that? So you only had like 4 eggs or 3 eggs or
brings
whatever?
they send you the little eggs
so
and the
cute.
little thing. And I always had extra eggs,
right? Because you can't.
I was like, I don't want 1 egg. I want 2 eggs.
So what do you do for special occasions so that you don't overeat and you're not then foraging in the trash for more food, like after a birthday and you've had cake, and because it doesn't have the nutrients we need?
Yeah, well, I mean, it just all depends. When we're having special events, like, it just depends on, is it window worthy?
Yeah.
And whether I want to eat or not. Like, my niece had a birthday party, and we went to it. It was middle of the day, lunchtime, and I looked around, and like, I'm just not going to eat right now.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
And it wasn't because I couldn't. I could have. But I was like, well, I don't really want to eat that. I just didn't want to. And I'll cook dinner later.
And plus, we know, I think all intermittent fasters will say this, we know now how that food affects us.
Right.
And so I couldn't open my window with sugar or carbs because my blood sugar just goes up and then comes down. Then I feel nauseated. Then I'm sweaty. And then I'm almost at number 3. You know,
I get it.
It's not looking good for me.
Yeah.
So I have to. I mean, I really have. And that's just. I always thought that was just for me, but I notice other people kind of saying the same thing. So I have gone to birthday parties and things, going, I'll pass.
I don't think I want that. And also, you know, like, I'm really a cake snob now. If I'm at a party, I will look at that cake and I'll be like, I mean, if it like came from the grocery store and they're taking it out of the bakery box, I'm like, enjoy your cake. And I'm not even wishing I could eat the cake. I don't want to. I know I'm not going to like the taste of it.
So what's your drug of choice if you're getting the cake? What do you want?
Oh, I'd like any kind of homemade cake.
Just any kind of homemade cake.
Oh, my sister makes amazing cakes, like a carrot cake with
that sounds
homemade
good.
cream cheese icing. Yes.
Yeah, that sounds good.
But it needs to be really good. Like, carrot cake can be disgusting, or it can be
Yeah.
like the best thing you've ever had in your life. And
We
it just
love
depends
carrot,
on who made it,
Yeah.
right? I'm not going to eat a cheap carrot cake for any reason.
Right. It's just not worth it.
No.
And it's what we say, what you've said too. We all save so much money.
I need a $50 cake, right?
Right.
A $90 cake.
I'll take it. I'll take it. But we save so much money intermittent
It's
fasting
true.
because when we do get the cake, we only have
It's going
one
to have
piece.
to be a really good cake.
Right, but we only want one
And it's
piece.
worth it.
And if someone brings you a cake, someone for Thanksgiving brought carrot cake, well, I'm still eating pieces out of my freezer once every. It was delicious.
Yeah.
Once every whatever, because I'm thinking, oh, that's what I want. And so I still, if y'all want to fight for them, 3 more pieces.
I don't know.
But
you might only have 2 after all.
Right, and nobody's window's open, so I'm not tattling. Okay, let's switch over to intermittent fasting.
We got some
we have the audience has asked questions. We have a real. I love the mix of people here from celebrated chef, from owner of a restaurant. Helen King is here with At the Corner, a great restaurant downtown Little Rock. A physician's here, Dr. Beth. Becky Norris, a wife and mother. Helene is one of the editors at the Arkansas Democrat Gazette. Tanera is my famous floral friend. Erica is a TV anchor. So we've all come in different walks of life to this journey. So we all have different perspectives. So Helene, you're up first. She said, I admit to struggling a bit to wait until my usual 2 p.m. window opening on days that I have an early morning workout. 5 a.m. Zoom class, 6:30 Peloton. can or should I run an earlier window on those days? What do you think?
Well, the answer to can I is always yes, because you're in charge at all times.
Yeah.
Should you? I don't know. It just really depends. You have to gauge whether you're really hungry or if your body's about to flip that metabolic switch, because sometimes that'll happen. Like you work out, they used to call it working up a good appetite, right? You work out, and then you're like, oh, I could eat a little bit. If you give it a little time, the hunger might just go away, and then you flip that metabolic switch. Now you're really into fat burning. Or if you give it a little time and you're like, I am really hungry, then you should eat. So it's really just, like if you have that unusual wave of hunger, see what happens in a little while. Give it 30 minutes, and then you'll know. If you ever start to feel shaky and nauseous, though, that's a sign your blood sugar's crashed.
Eat at that point.
And then you should eat. Don't try to like white knuckle it through a blood sugar crash. Eat. But sometimes,
so you think 30 minutes? Because a lot of you have asked me that as my clients. If I'm having that hunger, when do I lean in and eat? But
for me, like I have this Topo Chico right here. If I drink a little Topo Chico or something, it usually is like gone. And like, it's interesting. I was wearing a CGM in the fall, and I only wore it for a couple of weeks because I hate to track anything.
Right.
But it was interesting. I realized that when I would have that little wave of hunger, I would look at what my CGM, my blood sugar was doing, and that was always when it was going down into the 70s. I would have that little wave of hunger, like literally every day. I would have that little wave of hunger, and then I would look, and that was exactly when my blood sugar was going down into the 70s. And then for the whole rest of the time that I fasted, it just stayed steady right in that 70s range. It didn't like keep going to the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, now I'm dead. It stayed very steady right there at the 70s. And and the hunger went away, and I was, well fueled, ketones. I'm in ketosis now and feeling great, and I could just keep fasting and didn't have like crashes. But my blood sugar stayed so steady. It was fascinating to see.
And that's what we want for longevity. The CGM is a continuous glucose monitor that a physician can prescribe you.
Right.
Or in Arkansas, we can have them prescribed, and I've worn one for a couple of weeks. Same thing. It's really
interesting to see.
It is interesting, but it's almost too much data for me.
Well, it is. But also lets you know that when you're like getting your fasted blood sugar done or your blood glucose test back from your blood work that your doctor has you get for whatever reason, that one snapshot in time, people will say things like, oh my gosh, I got my fasted blood glucose and it's 10 points higher than it was last year. And I'm like, well, if you'd have waited 30 minutes, it might have been 20 points lower, because it is so variable. When you wear a CGM, you realize it's not static. It's not just like, well, there's your blood sugar. No.
Well, let's talk about the dawn effect, the phenomenon of dawn effect, because that's when, if you have people who are checking their glucose in the morning, they might panic and think, oh my gosh, it's high, but tell people why.
Well, I learned all about that from Dr. Jason Fung, and I'm not a medical doctor, but your body pushes out blood glucose at different periods of time for different things. And in the morning it'll do that. And where's that sugar coming from? Like, for example, someone might drink some black coffee and then notice their blood sugar's higher. Well, did the coffee add blood sugar to you or add sugar to your body? No, because it's black coffee. So it had to come from inside your body. Your body kicked it out from somewhere, your liver, and dumped some glycogen, and it made your blood sugar go up. And it's, is that bad? Well, we want our liver to deplete the glycogen over time, and that's how you flip that metabolic switch and get into ketosis eventually. So when I read the diabetes code, Dr. Jason Fung's book, have you read the diabetes code? It's fascinating. He's a nephrologist, kidney doctor.
Well, I say this, I have it on Audible because his stuff is sciencey.
It is.
Okay.
I was on the lake reading it. Chad was fishing.
Of course you were.
Reading the diabetes code.
Right.
Like when I think diabetes code, I'm thinking about the lake. So that's where I was reading it. But it's fascinating to realize that we've really been chasing the wrong number. When I say we, I mean I'm not a doctor. I mean like we think blood sugar is, because that's the thing that's easy to measure. So we're like, well, because it's easy to measure, we just measure that and see what it's doing. When really there's so much more going on inside your body. I read a great paper when I was writing Fast Feast Repeat. I think it was written by a nurse practitioner. I wouldn't swear to that, but it was about hyperinsulinemia, about insulin levels. And this nurse practitioner in the paper talked about how really that's what we should be measuring, our fasted insulin levels, because that's a leading indicator.
And that's Dr. Bickman's
Dr.
big
Bickman
thing.
too. But when the first thing that happens is you start having high levels of insulin all the time, and your blood sugar might be perfectly fine because your insulin's managing it, it's keeping it under control. Then eventually you become insulin resistant, and then all of a sudden now your blood sugar's out of whack. But if we were testing your fasted insulin level, we would have known that 2 years ago, and we would have worked to
20 years. He says it has a 20-year predictability.
I believe
if you look at it on paper, people who in their 40s are all of a sudden saying, I am insulin resistant, I'm overweight, he says if you could have looked back 20 years, you would have had some hints pointing into that direction.
I believe it. I absolutely do.
And it's a hard thing. I have my clients ask, and sometimes their doctors will say no.
Yeah.
And I say, just tell them you'll pay for it out of your own pocket. It's $5 or whatever it was.
Right.
You might get pushback, but it's if you can ask.
It's a great measurement to have because it really. And everyone should read that book, Why We Get Sick, Dr. Benjamin Bickman, because hyperinsulinemia is connected to so many things.
Isn't it 90% of modern diseases
so
are
many,
related to high insulin?
And I'll think back to the time when I was a teacher, and our children right now, like, we let them bring in water bottles and have them at their desk, but they're all putting flavor enhancers in there. So those children are keeping their insulin artificially high by putting in fruity flavored and sweet things nonstop. So we are setting them up for high levels of insulin. Your child needs to drink water. Water, plain water. Don't put anything in it. Do you know how many adults say things like, well, I can't stand the taste of plain water? I mean, what?
It's because they've been drunk on
Exactly.
stevia flavored something.
We think that it's supposed to be like excitement for the taste buds, but all that does is keeps your body releasing insulin, and there is the health epidemic right there.
And you feel, we all know we feel so much better once we remove anything that brings up our glucose or insulin, because they're two different things. Okay, here's a question.
Okay.
So I'm fasting 20 hours, some days 21, 22. When I lose this weight, what will my life be like? Will I always fast like this? From Never a Loser. Oh, thank you, Never for a Loser. And no, they're not telling who that is. There's some that are anonymous today.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. You don't know. It's impossible to know what maintenance will look like for you, but you'll know what feels right. Like, you might think, like I used to. I remember when I was back in my diet mindset and losing the weight with intermittent fasting, I remember like making all these plans. Like, once I get to my goal, then I'm going to do this on a Monday and this on a Tuesday and this on the weekend. And you're like planning all this elaborate stuff. And then, you get there and you're like, well, I really don't want to eat for 8 hours every day. You just don't want to. So you really feel, you settle into a pattern that feels right for you. And if you're not there yet, you can't imagine. You're like I thought I wanted to arrange my life so I could have the longest possible eating windows and maintain my weight. And what's that going to be?
Loophole. You're looking for the loophole.
Looking for the loophole. What's the maximum window I can have? But you don't. You get past that. You don't even think about that anymore. And so, like my eating window, one day might be 8 hours, one day might be 1 hour, one day it's 4 hours, one day it's 6 hours. And I think switching it up is a good thing, but it's different from day to day, and I really listen to my body, and I plan it around what I'm doing. Like yesterday, I opened my window. It was like probably around 5 p.m. I was like I said, I was at the airport, and I started with hummus. That was I didn't start with the chips.
Yeah,
started with hummus.
Some fat.
Because I wouldn't, if I had just eaten chips, I would not have felt great, no matter what they were. But because it was 5, and I'm like, well, if I don't eat now, I'm not going to get to Little Rock till 8, which is really 9, because I'm, so I'm like, I need to go ahead and have a little something now, and I'll have a little something later. And so I opened out of convenience for my day.
Yeah.
But not because I had to eat right then, or I was going to, I could have fasted till I got to Little Rock. I just didn't want to.
Yeah, and you don't have to.
Exactly.
Okay, here's a question. I lost almost 60 pounds with IF in about 6 months, maintained that for 6 to 8 months, but over the holidays allowed myself more treats, even still within my 3 to 4 hour window, and have regained about 10 pounds. What advice would you have for tightening things back up and losing those pounds again?
Well, again, it's the tightening it up, and it's really easy to do with the the holiday foods. A lot of people do find, like I usually do, find that, when January rolls around, my honesty pants are a little tighter. And it's just a matter of just tightening it up and focusing on that food quality again.
Well,
really.
I remember saying in the very beginning, you would have that Prosecco and maybe something sweet and maybe a roll at dinner.
Yeah.
And then I do think age, metabolism,
That is true.
menopause all plays into that.
Yeah.
Hormones, thyroid, of course.
Yes.
And then you said, no, I have to, then I save the Prosecco for a certain occasion, or
Right.
the sweet treat, and just limiting.
It is completely true. Now, I've now been through menopause as an intermittent faster. I'm 52, and yesterday I had my 7-year anniversary of hitting my goal weight. So I have maintained. Yeah.
Awesome.
I've maintained my weight, for 7 years now.
That's insane.
And within a range. I don't weigh anymore, so I don't really know what the scale says, but I can always tell. And I know that if I had been weighing, we would see, gentle ups and downs over those years. I've never had to buy bigger clothes, but I do have periods of time when after the holidays and I had a little more pumpkin pie than it was homemade pumpkin pie, really good quality pumpkin pie, but you still can eat too much pumpkin pie. But as we get older, we really do need less food.
Yeah.
And that is something we may not want to hear. I don't think we can eat the quantity at 52 that we could have eaten at 32. I really think, our bodies don't require as much. When I was doing the research for Feast Without Fear back in 2017, I was really digging into the blue zones and the people who live so long, and I found some kind of really interesting data. It was like governmental data about, I don't count calories, but it was like how many calories people tend to eat, like Americans at certain ages and in all these different places. People in these, like Okinawa, Japan, and these places that are these longevity hotspots, they eat significantly fewer calories than we're eating in America. They're eating less volume of food. We're volume eaters in America. We go, we get our big plate of food that's giant. I've got my grandmother's china, and it's like the little bitty teacup.
I know.
We're eating a lot of food. So as we get older, I do think we need to eat less food.
For longevity.
For longevity,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think our bodies just we slow down a little bit.
What does maintenance look like for you as you live it?
Well, again, it just looks like I pay attention to how my clothes are fitting. If I need to tighten it up, I tighten it up. But if there's a special occasion, I'm going to fully embrace it.
I hope you do.
I always do.
Okay, how do you handle taking medicine that must be taken with food during your fast? For example, I had to take an anti-inflammatory twice a day with food.
Yeah, that's tricky. And first of all, the first thing I would do is have a conversation with your doctor or pharmacist and see if you can work out a dosing schedule. Because sometimes there's just like a common dosing schedule that they tell you, but really you can figure something else
you can
out.
tweak it.
Like, I'm not saying not to take something with food if it requires food. I'm just saying you could change the dosing time of certain medications, but don't make that decision on your own. You got to work with your doctor and pharmacist for that, because you definitely don't want to take things on an empty stomach. They're going to damage your stomach.
Right.
That is true.
And protecting the gut there.
Exactly. Has to protect that stomach lining too. But you first of all see if there's a plan. Like, let them know you're doing intermittent fasting, because so many people are doing it now that doctors should be able to work with you to come up with something, hopefully. But if you absolutely have to, and you're going to have your window later, and you have to have something, you need to find something to coat the stomach. Maybe have a little heavy cream or a little something. Dr. Fung suggests a handful of leafy greens. Yeah, that's eating. Yes, that breaks your fast, but it's going to have a minimal effect. And you might be really hungry for a little while after that, and just try to power through that and see what you can do. But you have to do what you have to do.
That's right.
For your health.
And you've always said, take your medicine.
You got to take your medicine.
Take your medicine.
But first of all, talk to your doctor, because your doctor might say, oh yeah, you can just have that then and that then, and it'll be fine. And you don't really have to have it at 8 a.m. like you thought you did. Maybe they say take it first thing in the morning with food, because you're supposed to have it with your first meal of the day. Well, your first meal of the day is 3. It's perfectly fine to have it at 3 with your food.
True.
You just don't know because you didn't ask.
Yeah. Okay, Chef wants to know right over there, how do you get through a plateau?
Well, there's so many different things you can do for a plateau. And I have a chapter in Fast, Feast, Repeat with all sorts of things about what to do about a plateau. The number one plateau breaker is time. Because people found you just stay on that plateau for a while, and then your body is like, okay, and then it picks back up again. But alternate daily fasting.
He's done that.
Have you done that?
Yeah. Remember?
On my long days, I teach 12 days, and I work another 6 hours at the club.
Yeah.
I tend to do an 8-hour window.
Okay.
On your refeed day,
On the
right?
up days,
Yeah.
okay.
Up
And then
day.
what were you doing? Were you doing like a full 40-hour fast and then an 8-hour window?
The whole month of December, I did 40 hours and 8.
Okay.
But I lived on 20 and 4 for 7 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just still plateauing on the 40 and 8?
I lost 1 or 2 pounds, but
Okay.
I stayed at 85 pounds for about a month and a half.
Now you're at 93, right? Now you're at 93.
Yeah. So time, it picks back up. Our bodies really do kind of regroup a little bit. So plateaus happen no matter what you're doing. You're going to hit something where you're stagnant for a while, and then your body might just pick it right back up. But just keep
and I
going.
think Laurie Lewis has said, Laurie, I think you said one time in a clubhouse we were in that some people, like the early intermittent fasters, and I know we're all more seasoned here, some of you are still new, but you said something like it's about month 7 or so before some people get their groove.
Well, for me, month 7 is when people really wake up and they start noticing that diet mindset isn't ruling their life anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. I remember there was a 7-month something. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's something to get
It
away
takes
from.
time. It really does take time to change all those thoughts. And it might take more than 7 months. I mean, it took me years to unlearn some of those diet thoughts.
Yeah, the diet thoughts are bad because, when I tell people now to look at the, if they're buying packaged foods or whatever, I'm saying to look at the back to see if any seed oils were used. They're
Yeah.
looking for calories.
Right.
And I go, no. I'm sorry calories are on there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry it's on the menu to the restaurants you go to because let's not talk about that. Let's talk
Yeah.
about what they're cooking the food with.
Yeah, and those seed oils are very inflammatory. And, changing what you eat is powerful because these unnatural things that are made in a lab, like these seed oils, they're very inflammatory, and then your body responds in a negative way, and then your body's having to. Anyway, it's not good.
It's bad.
It's bad, just bad.
Chef's wife Lori said, "What has been your most significant NSV non-scale victory?"
Honestly, it's maintaining my weight for 7 years, and I mean that's I guess a scale victory.
Yeah.
Just the whole idea that it's just freeing the mental freedom
Yeah, for
of
sure.
intermittent fasting has been the most powerful victory.
I think this is a great question because if any of us have ever talked to someone who works out in the gym, and we're going to talk to those people tonight when we have our
Okay,
special
yeah.
meeting with healthcare providers and fitness experts, but some of them say you need food before and after exercise, those BCAAs and protein and whatever, which is all racket, but whatever. But this question is, why do intermittent fasters work out fasted?
And I bet those fitness people will sell you some of that
I
too.
bet
They're
they
like,
will,
I've
right.
got here's a pre-workout that I'm going to sell you,
right.
and here's a post-workout that I'm going to sell you.
Yeah.
And there was some kind of ice cream that I saw at the grocery store the other day called night food or something. You're supposed to eat it before you go to bed, or I don't know. Look, if someone is trying to sell you something, then you don't need that. Let's think about what our bodies do while we're fasting. Let's think about autophagy. What is autophagy? Autophagy is your body's way of recycling what's already on hand. It's recycling protein. So let's imagine that you're doing a workout and you're recycling some protein. You don't need to take it all in. You need to have sufficient protein within like a 24-hour period. It's not. Also, I don't really know what people think. Do they think that you put it in your mouth and it immediately goes to your muscle?
I guess so.
No, that is not how the body works, right? I put the protein in my mouth and it immediately builds my no. So you got to just have enough sufficient protein building blocks over the course of your day, but it doesn't need to be immediately before or immediately after. I mean, think about it. People didn't have food all the time. They were out hunting and gathering, and they didn't just collapse of, you got to have your body has to be able to go hunt whatever it is, or gather, or do the farming, or whatever it was. You can't just go to the grocery store back then. And your body has to have a way to manage that. So
when you talked about those pre-workout things too, and there are people there. There's a bar that says the fasting bar. Have you seen it?
Oh yeah.
It's a fasting bar. Well,
know.
no, when you're fasting, you don't have the bar.
Yeah.
So I don't understand what's the philosophy behind
I
that.
don't know. And the ingredients are like nuts and honey, and I'm like, They're
then
like,
you're
it
not
fools
fasting.
your body into thinking you're fasting. Like,
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
It's food you're eating. And so, like, I know some people that, like, go in there and, like, will troll the Instagram account. And they'll, like, say, that is not fasting. And that gets deleted and they get blocked. And, I mean, I don't engage on it. But it's not fasting. If you're eating, you're not fasting. And that's just really, I mean, think about it like this. If you were going to go have surgery and your doctor said, I'd like you to come in fasted, you're like, oh, good, I just ate a fasting bar. Your doctor would be like, no. You are not fasted if you ate that. That's not fasting. So.
Or I had a Diet Coke or whatever. Yeah. Isn't the best freedom, because we're all getting up in years, all of us. When you go for the colonoscopy and they tell you nothing after midnight, we're like,
that's
good.
easy.
I'm good. Or
who's eating after midnight?
Right,
anyway.
I know. But
Unless
Dr.
you've been
Beth
to
is
the
here.
bar or
She
something.
knows there are so many people that push back on being told you can't eat after midnight. And you have to come in tomorrow morning at 9 for a procedure. People are like, how am I going to make it?
Yeah.
You're like, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. Well, they honestly, though, because they're not fat adapted, maybe they're not fine.
Oh, no, that's true.
Because they literally are like fueled by everything they're putting in all the time.
Yeah.
So for us, it's so easy because we're fat adapted, and I could go for however long.
What
but
is
they
your
really,
longest fast you've ever done?
Well, before I knew what I was doing, I did an 84-hour fast, and I would not recommend that. I now would not fast, do not fast longer than 72 hours unless you're under medical supervision. But this was like, the wild west of fasting, because we were all just figuring out, this is before the obesity code came out. This is probably 2014 or 2015, somewhere in there. And I mean, I was in a group, we didn't know what we were doing. We're like, let's just see how long we can go.
How did you do it then? Did you drink
know.
soft
I
drinks?
was not fasting clean.
Yeah,
we didn't know
right.
any of that. It was, I think I read Joel Fuhrman's book, and he was talking about, fasting people for like 21 days or something.
Yeah.
But he was doing it under medical supervision. So
Right.
that's the key.
And Dr.
You don't
Fung
wanna-
does have those longer fasts that he's talked about.
But he's supervising
That's
people
right.
that are doing them. So you really don't want to go it on your own. And I do remember one thing that stuck out for me from Dr. Joel Fuhrman's book. And he's been using fasting for decades with patients. He talks about if you're doing these longer fasts, he clearly says your metabolism will slow.
Oh, for sure. We all know.
And that's the thing with the longer fasting. The research on the longer fast, like there's some research with 72-hour fasting, and the metabolic rate went up during the first part of the fast, and then it started to head back down again. And so by 72, it still wasn't at baseline, but it was on that downward trajectory, showing that eventually it is going to keep going down. And so, longer fasts are not without metabolic consequences. And I mean,
And you call longer anything than 72 or anything over 40?
Here's the thing. You have to balance your fasting with feasting, because your body, if you're over fasting, your body is going to think you're starving it. Because, fasting is amazing, but nothing's coming in. So, my book is Fast, Feast, Repeat. You got to balance it so your body doesn't think that you're in a panic. And I just remember those early days when we didn't really know what we were doing, and I certainly didn't. And watching the people who are like, well, I'm just going to fast for 21 days. And people would do that in the early days of the Facebook groups. And those people would have spectacular weight loss.
For that time.
And then every time, those people would start binging, blaming themselves, feeling like, why am I so weak? I was able to fast for 21 days and now I'm like just shoveling in the food, and the weight regain would be dramatic. And they're like, there's something wrong with me. Oh. Now that I understand it, and I talk about this in Fast, Feast, Repeat, they did the Minnesota starvation experiment. That is how our bodies respond to prolonged restriction. Our bodies don't want us to die. And I'm sorry, fasting for 21 days, your body is going to be like, something's happening, right? And so that urge to binge, the urge, the being just like, you can't stop thinking about food. Your body is giving you that drive to eat because it wants you to be alive. It wants you to survive. So those people that were doing those longer fasts didn't understand it was their body telling them that was a bad idea. So that really shaped my thoughts on the longer fast, just because I've seen so many people just really jump right into those longer fasts and think that they're doing, and then their bodies fight back. And then they blame themselves and think, I'm just so weak, I can't stick to anything. And it's like, no, your body is commanding you to stop doing that. And so that's how you know what you're doing is good for you, because you feel better and better over time. Not during the adjustment period that you're not going to feel great. But once you've adapted and adjusted to fasting, you're going to feel really good. But if you ever start getting an increased urge to binge as you're fasting, think, have I been over-restricting and or not nourishing my body enough? And the answer is probably yes.
Now, Dr. Fuhrman, what was his book? Who is the first voice? Was it Dr. Michael Mosley?
Well, no. BBC? No. He was definitely not the first voice. Fuhrman's book is old.
Okay. I guess I'm not familiar with it. So
it was fasting for health benefits, really. It was not about losing weight. And he actually even talks about you will lose weight, but then your metabolism is going to be really slow after you fasted that long, and you're going to have to be really careful, and you can't go back to how you used to eat. And he had like a very specific way he wanted you to eat. He's like, you got to stick to that or you're going to gain it all back. So it was not a weight loss. It was health that he was going after.
Okay, last question. With people who struggle with thyroid, and metabolism issues, with fasting, how long have you seen one have to fast, and what eating window would you have to follow to see results?
Well, that's going to be highly individual, and if your thyroid is well managed, that's, I think, a big part of it is having a healthcare practitioner who's going to help you manage your thyroid to the point where you're feeling really good. So,
okay, any other questions? Because we're going to wrap things up. Okay, y'all give her a big round of applause. You can all write in your baby books that you saw a podcast recorded live at somebody's home that overlooked the Arkansas River. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jen. Great job. Thanks for listening to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe and download all the episodes and leave a review, won't you? The Lisa Fisher Said podcast is produced by ClantonCreative.com. Thanks for listening to the Lisa Fisher Said podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe and download all the episodes and leave a review, won't you? The Lisa Fisher Said podcast is produced by ClantonCreative.com.